about Final Fantasy VII, isn't there? Lucky number 7, the luckiest number of them all. Back in '97, when it launched, Final Fantasy VII wasn't just another game. Final Fantasy VII was this remarkably powerful, personal, and emotional experience for an entire generation of us. It was like nothing any of us had ever seen, or would ever see again, and it's really not hard to see why. Back then, Final Fantasy VII was, and still is, an undeniable RPG tour de force. But not only that, like I have already said way back on my BioShock video, it is not ever just the game itself, no matter how great its qualities may be, that will forever define it for us, but equally as much the where and the when in our lives we experience a game that will forever shape how we feel about it. And for a whole generation of us back in '97 and '98, you could not have possibly asked for a more pitch-perfect time for such a game to have come into all our little gaming lives than when Final Fantasy VII did. After all, my generation was once the Nintendo generation, so to speak. Most of us are now from 24 to 33, but back then we were the generation whose entire childhood was almost entirely spent shaped by saving princesses, fighting robot masters, fighting vampires, shooting our way through alien jungles and alien planets, and so much more. If you had to ask any of us to define our childhood for you in 3 words, it would be unspeakably easy. You would get the exact same answer every time. The same 3 words. Nintendo Entertainment System. That was it! That was childhood for us, and you can bet if you then asked us for 5 words instead of 3, you would definitely be getting either Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis added to the list. Nintendo, Super Nintendo, and a pinch of Sega Genesis. I doubt you will ever find a time in gaming more beloved, treasured, or romanticized than that. But things were about to change dramatically, weren't they? Not just for my entire generation, but simultaneously for the entire gaming industry as well. For us young gamers, it meant the end of grade school, the end of childhood, the march on to middle school, high school, puberty, hormones, growth spurs, growing pains, social awkwardness, and acne, to just name a few. It meant we were all about to go through the largest and most dramatic changes in our entire life since inception, and paralleling this exactly at the exact same time was everything the very gaming industry was going through as well. Their greatest changes since their inception, too. Although we were going through the switch from being children to teenagers to one-day adults, the gaming industry was going through the big switch from the tiny and scaled 2D games marketed almost entirely to the kiddie corner to the now larger-than-life 3D games, all but epic in scale and equally marketed to the growing young adult generation too. It cannot be understated how perfectly we were paralleling each other at that time. The entire gaming industry, every company from Nintendo to Sony, and every kid across America from 12 to 17 years of age with a controller in hand. All of us scrambling and suffering and searching and lamenting, trying to find our brand new identities in a brand new, often scary world. All we needed was a game. A game that, for the industry's sake, could showcase to the world what the new landscape of 3D gaming can do. And for us, the former Nintendo kids, now Sony teens for all our sakes, give us a game and a story that could showcase everything we were capable of, show us everything we could do, and forever change not only the way we looked at gaming entirely, but also ourselves in a time in life when we could have not needed it more. Middle school. Middle school and early high school. Also on my BioShock video, I have already mentioned that I thought middle school was a terrible place. A place so bad that even the bullies hated it. And that says something when you know for a fact, after watching my BioShock video, that this is coming from a man that has worked prisons for the past 6 years. And trust me when I say this, friends, I will take a prison any day of the week over a middle school. Because middle schools were a terrible place any way you slice it. A terrible time in all our lives, and when you think about it, it really didn't have to be. When you think about it, that's a real shame, because if any time in our lives should have been a magical special time where we stroll through our new, budding adult lives like a sunlit walk in a park of new and exciting wonders, it should have been then. but instead it was a highly psychotic, highly vicious, and savage time where most of us are driven into a frenzy of kill or be kill, popularity contest insanity due to gallons upon gallons of never before experienced hormones pumping through our newly minted teenage veins. You know, though I have already compared the world of BioShock to be very similar to the world of prisons, you know what? It's extremely similar to the world of middle school, too. They are all absolutely terrible places. Now, let's get back to RPGs, shall we? On my RPG prelude, I have already talked extensively about highly specialized and highly sensitive individuals, and that these individuals seem to be attracted to RPGs for what I think to be specific reasons. And I also talked about on my RPG prelude about when you are in fact a highly sensitive individual, stuff often affects you 2 times, sometimes 3 times harder than the average Joe. Well, even though just about each and every single one of us had a tough time in middle school, if you just so happen to be a highly specialized and highly sensitive middle schooler, you bet your ass you sometimes had it 2 times, often 3 times harder a couple of years than just about anybody else walking those halls. Now, I don't know about any of you out there, but I can willingly admit I had a pretty hard time in middle school. I can willingly admit that I froze up like a deer in headlights back then. Like a great big wuss and got run over by a fucking dump truck. I was just like that little curly-haired kid in the Hunger Games that got picked off 60 seconds after the horn rang, and I'm pretty sure that was a lot of us back then. I'm pretty sure a lot of us felt like we got picked off back then. A lot of us felt victimized and totally helpless. Helpless! Let me say that again, helpless. But let's say back then, I knew of a place where you didn't have to feel so helpless. A place where you actually had a fighting chance for once. And you could actually accomplish something for once rather than continuing to be a human punching bag / self-esteem booster for just about everybody else walking the middle school halls. A place where you could actually even fuck up on occasion, make mistakes, and no one would ever laugh at you or care. Would you want to go to this place back then? Yes, you say? More than anything you say? Well, in actuality, you already did go to this place. You went to this place every time after school because this place was called video games. Ha! And yet here, I'll do you one better. Inside of the world of video games, what if I told you there was an even better place to go? A place where you could actually be the hero for once instead of your total loser, cowardly self. A place where you could actually go on a quest to save an entire kingdom, an entire world, and actually prove to everyone, including everyone in your entire 7th and 8th grade, that you were anything but a total pansy. And best of all, what if I told you in this place you could actually have a nice group of friends for once to accompany you that in no way were a bunch of pansies like you, but are in fact pretty cool. And in no way do they ever make fun of you or treat you like shit. Would you in fact want to go to that place? You bet your ass you would, but where is this magical place? What is it that I'm talking of? I'm talking, of course, about the land of RPGs. My God, right? No wonder we all became so addicted to this gaming genre back then. Because back then, giving a bunch of 32-bit role-playing games to a bunch of disenfranchised, highly sensitive, highly beaten down, and broken up nerds was the equivalent to giving us all free crack. Because let's face it, back then, everything, literally everything in our lives suddenly felt completely out of our control. Everything except for video games. Heck, even our own bodies were no longer under our complete control. Even our identities and who we thought we once were could change at any minute. So to say that many of us felt powerless and hopeless back then would have been the understatement of the entire year. We were going through an unspeakable amount of hell at that time, and video games were one of the few things that still made us feel like we had a handle on things in our lives. Sony could have backed and supplied a major advertising campaign for just about any major RPG back then, and it still would have caught on like wildfire. You could not have possibly asked for a better, more pitch-perfect time for RPGs to finally catch in America than in 1997 and 98. But as fate would have it, and I mean that in every sense of the word, as fate would have it, it was not just the perfect time for any RPG, no! It was the perfect time for the perfect RPG. The one and only lucky number, Final Fantasy VII. Haters can hate this game all they want until the end of time, but nothing can ever change the fact how perfect everything was for Final Fantasy VII to finally launch, making it a game not only to become one of the top-grossing RPG games of all time, but to make a meteor-sized impact on the entire gaming world that we are still feeling today. Summer through fall 1997, Sony dared to risk $100 million of their own money on an advertising campaign to back this one particular console RPG game. Why? Because through Final Fantasy VII, they wanted to showcase to the entire industry, to the entire world, everything that their new PlayStation could do that the then still console king Nintendo and their new Nintendo 64 never could. And though in hindsight now, it looks to be a master stroke, a knockout punch even, so to speak, yet in all honesty, it was a huge risk for them. Think about it. If Final Fantasy VII had flopped, not only would it have meant they would have wasted 100 million advertising dollars, but their entire message of, look what the PlayStation can do, would have been flipped completely upside down on them and transformed into, yeah, you should just go buy a 64. We're sorry. And if you actually thought PlayStation risking its entire reputation on 7 was a huge gamble, that compares nothing to what Square had at stake. Square, the creators of Final Fantasy VII, weren't just risking their entire reputation, but the financial fate of their entire company. If Final Fantasy VII had tanked, there would be no more Final Fantasy games, and there would be no more Square. Most people seem to forget this, or fail to realize it at all, but Final Fantasy VII was the biggest risk Square has ever taken since the original Final Fantasy I back in '87. A game where they had called it Final for a very good reason. You see, to make 7 a reality, Square had to make some serious tough choices. Number one, they had to leave Nintendo, the company they had made their entire fortune giving exclusives to, because their 3D project had become too large to ever put on a cartridge. Number two, they had to spend over $45 million, making 7 the most expensive game ever produced for its time, near threatening to bankrupt the entire company. And on top of all that, number 3, they dared to risk pissing off the entire fan base that had entirely supported them up to that point by almost completely throwing out the entire tried and true formula that had once made every previous Final Fantasy a Final Fantasy. Now I dare you to find a risk in gaming history bigger than that! And I dare you to find a gaming gamble that paid off as well as Final Fantasy VII's did. 7 was such a resounding international blockbuster success because they left Nintendo, because they switched to PlayStation discs, because they invested everything into its development, and maybe most of all because they chose to all but abandon their entire previously classical medieval swords and sorcery formula in exchange for a more modern one in every sense of the word. Final Fantasy VI for the Super Nintendo may have dabbled with some modern motifs and backdrops and Blade Runner-esque inspired set dressings, but 7 was a completely clean break with not a knight or a king or a castle to be seen anywhere. And that's exactly why it was so brilliant. In essence, Final Fantasy and Square decided to 100% embrace the brand new world they found the entire industry to be in. In essence, they decided to move with the times, to grow up and reinvent themselves, something a lot of us were having trouble with back then. I'm Justin M. Bailey. Please come join me again soon for part 3 of JMB on RPGs, where we will continue to delve into the world of Final Fantasy VII. I'll see you all then. Thank you.